Hi all, welcome back to the Congressional App Challenge Debugged podcast. I'm your host Medha, and today our guest is Daniel Kroese. Daniel is a cyber policy veteran who is Palo Alto Networks Senior Director of Public Policy and Government Affairs. In this role, he leads efforts interfacing with Capitol Hill and brings a wealth of legislative and executive branch cybersecurity experience to the company. Daniel most recently served as the staff director to ranking member Catco on the House Homeland Security Committee. In this role, he formulated and advanced an aggressive bipartisan cybersecurity agenda for the committee. At Palo Alto Networks, he leverages all of his experiences to lead the public policy and government affairs team to drive legislative advocacy that promotes greater resilience throughout the entire cybersecurity ecosystem. Daniel, how are you doing?
I'm excellent. Thanks for the invitation to chat here today about some really exciting and important issues near and dear to my heart. I appreciate the invitation.
Thanks for coming on. And so I'd love it if you could just first give us a little bit of a breakdown to what your role at Palo Alto Networks looks like and what your day-to-day is.
Yeah, absolutely. So Palo Alto Networks is a large global cybersecurity company. My role here is on our public policy and government affairs team. We're the team that sort of sits at the middle, the intersection between a lot of the operational cybersecurity issues our company engages on, both from a threat intelligence perspective and from providing products and services to tens of thousands of customers. And we're the interface between that activity and then other governments around the world from a threat intelligence perspective, from a partnership perspective, from a capacity building perspective, helping to ensure that the policy winds are blowing in a direction that will indeed help cyber resilience across the economy at large. So it's a really exciting time where I think the role of public policy and then sort of boots on the ground national security work, actually protecting enterprises every day from sophisticated nation state attacks. Policy is no longer this esoteric thing sort of hanging out there, a distant vestige dotted line. It's really integrated with the efforts day in and day out to protect networks, and that's a pretty exciting mission.
That's so cool. And I know that a lot of your background is, working with the government, with creating legislative work. And so what kind of inspired you to realize you want to work in the private sector for now and switch over to Palo Alto Networks?
I really think it all starts with the mission, and for me, the mission has stayed the same. I first got really introduced and became focused career-wise in cybersecurity about a decade ago. At that point, I was a chief of staff for a member of Congress who chaired a cybersecurity subcommittee in the House of Representatives. And believe it or not, about a decade ago, we had a hearing that we hosted, and the title of the hearing was radical and provocative at the time. And that title was Cybersecurity is National Security, which seems almost crazy to think about now that was at all like sort of wading into uncharted territory. But when I think about what has changed over the last decade, back then cybersecurity was well recognized as an industry and a profession, but it was still very much thought of sort of as an IT thing, right? If an enterprise had a cyber incident, it was an IT nuisance. The IT folks needed to go kind of fix it and get the systems back online. But there wasn't really that recognition that across all of our industries, you just think about the amount of intellectual property that's of interest to other nation states out there, whether it's China or Russia or Iran or North Korea, and then the damage that they can cause in sort of a hybrid warfare sense, by potentially having footholds in critical infrastructure and things like that. A lot of the things that we saw recently in the Russia-Ukraine conflict in terms of Russia sort of disabling communications devices and satellite communications that the Ukrainian army depended on, all that's not hypothetical anymore. We see the blending of cybersecurity not just being an IT thing, but being an integrated part of our economic and national security in our way of life. That was kind of crazy, provocative statement a decade ago, and now it's just commonplace and widely understood. And so I've been really driven to that North Star of helping be part of the solution with that trajectory of that policy inertia. That career path has taken me 3 different stints in government, 2 on Capitol Hill and 1 in the executive branch, working at the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, and now in government at now in the private sector at Palo Alto Networks. But sort of a roundabout answer to your question, it doesn't feel like a huge shift. It feels like all sort of part of the same journey. Maybe just the business card is a little bit different. I talk to a lot of the same people about a lot of the same things all day, just perhaps with a different email signature. still enjoy spending a good portion of my time engaging with policymakers in the executive and legislative branch and around the world. So even though I have left government, in a weird way, I don't feel like I'm truly gone. I think that was evidenced by a few weeks ago. Really enjoyed coming back to the Capitol Visitor Center in the House of Representatives and speaking on a panel to folks about the importance of digital hygiene and privacy. So to me, it feels all part of the same journey. And maybe that sounds cliche, but it very much has been about the mission and the interest in that.
That makes complete sense. And so you mentioned that the most provocative statement 10 years ago about cybersecurity was the fact that it's national security. What's that statement now that you think 10 years down the road we'll think is shocking? That's like that it was controversial to begin with.
Yeah, I don't want to say that was the most provocative statement necessarily.
Right.
We did not have a super hard time convincing people of that, but it was
Right.
novel, if nothing else. It certainly
Right.
was novel. I think right now, when we look back 10 years from now, any sort of, in terms of thesis statements or things that we bet on that we were right on or wrong on, or sort of, central theses to the industry and where it's headed, I feel like AI is at the center of that. So as a company now, a huge focus. If you look at sort of how we are talking about the services we offer our customers, it's very much about being a cybersecurity partner in the age and era of AI. Everything is sort of couched in the age and era of AI, and what that means just in terms of the vastness of data out there that needs to be protected, and what it helps adversaries do, and most importantly for our company, what it helps defenders do. So I think in terms of a statement that I hope we're right on. I know as a company we are innovating like crazy to try to ensure we are right on, but it's that we actually think AI is going to be the great turbocharger of cyber defense, and I hope we are right at that. And there's a lot of evidence that we are well on our way. The tug of war of AI right now, in terms of how it is leveraged by both attackers and defenders, it is really a great tug of war. Or for society, it's clear which side of that tug of war we would prefer to win. That obviously requires a lot of innovation and research and investment and things like that. The reason that we are so optimistic about AI's potential for cyber defense, and we talked a little bit about this at the Congressional App Challenge panel, is that the greatest source of frustration and difficulty for network defenders historically has been that they are overworked. They have alert fatigue. They are sitting in these SOCs, these security operations centers, and they are being drowned with different data feeds from their network, from their cloud, from endpoints, and there's all these tools and sensors out there which are really helpful products, but they're just drowning overworked analysts with all these data feeds, and
Right.
they have this impossible task of having to triage that and synthesize it and make sense of it and correlate it in real time and then act upon it to actually fortify their networks. AI is the ultimate force multiplier for that, and so allowing detection and response times to go from weeks and months to seconds and minutes. And so because it's able to triage all that security data instantaneously, and then allow the overworked analysts to actually be proactive in terms of
Right.
a lot of the threat hunting and things they're doing. So that is a really optimistic story. Of course, balancing the other side of that tug of war is the fact that adversaries are leveraging AI for their malicious activity. For the most part, we're seeing that in what they're doing around what we call social engineering, which is phishing attacks, which is emails to sort of get you to click the link. And historically, I think folks got pretty good at discerning those emails. Those Nigerian prince emails that had typos
Right.
everywhere. That it was pretty easy. This seems like trouble and too good to be true. Now, with the generative AI, the believability and the context-specific believability of that email coming to you on a topic from someone that you had just engaged with, so you had just maybe you had posted on social media about taking your pet to the vet or something like that, and then you get a thing that said an email that looks like it's from the vet, just wanting you to confirm your payment info or something like that, and it's very believable. And so, based on the ability of generative AI to understand that, to scrape all that public available info and have very context specific, so that is a huge concern on the adversarial front, certainly. But pulling that all together, sort of to your question about a decade from now, what is potentially the provocative statement that we hope is right? My hope is that AI has actually turned a decade from now to be the ultimate turbocharger of cyber defense.
Yeah, I mean, I think that makes complete sense, right? Like, our adversaries are using AI too, so we have to be using AI and leveraging AI as a tool, right? For the threat of like any sort of cyber warfare or anything like that. And so, in the context of cyber warfare, right? Especially thinking about like threat of wars, global conflict, how do you kind of strike a balance between protecting national security but then also protecting individual privacy rights?
Yeah, so on the pure cybersecurity front, we would make a strong argument that cybersecurity is a great enabler of personal
Hmm.
privacy. In fact, I don't think that's really a controversial statement at all. If cybersecurity is the protection of systems that contain data, that you want that data to stay on that system and not be leaked into the hands it shouldn't be on,
Hmm.
cybersecurity ultimately is an enabler of that end state, which is quite positive. I think you've actually seen that in a lot of legislation to propose to create federal privacy frameworks is that they all, for the most part, have express permissible purposes saying, like, yes, we want to constrain industry's ability to sort of scrape your social media data and this and that. We don't want to constrain industry's ability to nimbly leverage security data that feeds into network defense tools, because if we did that, we'd actually be creating headwinds for the very cyber tools that we need to protect those systems and the privacy of those systems to begin with. So there is a little bit of a symbiotic relationship there that I do think you are seeing a necessary and rightful recognition of. There are obviously very real national security privacy tug of wars that exist. I don't know if they're as central to the cyber arena as maybe sort of like in the intelligence community at large. So that is a very real consideration. You just saw a big, and I don't, messy is the right word, but not the right word, but contentious perhaps battle on Capitol Hill to reauthorize a portion of what's called FISA of the Foreign
Yeah.
Intelligence Surveillance Act, which is an intelligence tool, very powerful and helpful in a lot of regards to surveil non-Americans outside of the United States and to be able to intercept their communications for national security purposes. There, of course, is an issue, a consideration there that has to be taken into account where those communications even if they are targeting non-Americans on foreign soil, often incidentally include on the other end of that email traffic an American. And so how that incidental collection, how the personal privacy of those people is dealt with has remained sort of a contentious and I would argue a healthy. These are the type of things we should be debating, those tug of wars. So that's actually just something that has happened in the last month here on Capitol Hill is a 2-year reauthorization of that program. But in that process and the machinations of it, and I think it's an interesting issue where you actually get interesting coalitions of the right and left sort of coming together in places that they otherwise don't on other issues from sort of a libertarian perspective and things like that. But regardless, that's an example I think of where the national security privacy tug of war is very real. I think my optimistic take on it is it's contentious in a healthy way that we sort of debate these things and land in a place where we think privacy is sufficiently protected without hamstringing
Hmm.
necessary national security tools.
That makes a lot of sense. And so you mentioned FISA. I'm curious, what other types of legislation have you seen that would be interesting when it comes to that tug of war of national security and individual privacy? Or what legislation do you think should we need in order to better protect, our personal cybersecurity as well as our national security?
Yeah, I don't know if I would say it's in that tug of war category, but
Hmm.
I think a really compelling place that we should probably double down is you hear, for example, the director of the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency, Jen Easterly, talk about these target rich, resource poor entities, sort of in that quadrant of they're an attractive target, but they, for a variety of reasons, don't have the resources to defend themselves properly. And one of the examples that's always brought up there is sort of the water sector. They are very much one of the 16 critical infrastructure sectors. Obviously, something we depend on for our way of life, but these aren't Fortune 500 financial services institutions and banks. They're often
Hmm.
sort of municipally owned and operated and don't have deep pockets necessarily. Yet we've seen a variety of actors, nation state and otherwise, target the water sector in pretty concerning ways. And so there have been some early success stories of how do you infuse resources responsibly into sectors like that so they can better harden and fortify their defenses. And so we've seen things like a few years ago there was a state and local cybersecurity grant program that was signed into law, which provided $1 billion over 4 years for state and local governments, and then some of kind of the vestiges of state and local government. So that does encapsulate some of the municipal electric utilities and municipal water utilities and things like that, and provided a really compelling model that it's between 80 and 90% of the dollars there they could just receive. They had a small match, 10 to 20% for cyber purposes. So it really infused necessary resources in a lot of these target-rich, resource-poor entities that are very, in a number of senses, on the front lines of cyber battles, and their cyber resilience impacts our daily lives and our digital way of life. Yet they don't inherently have the resources to protect themselves. So I kind of look at efforts like that as a down payment. And in one some sense, it's great that we're having $1 billion here and there flow to these entities. In the grand scheme of things, actually, when you think about the American economy at large, that's probably just a down payment and a drop in the bucket of what they need to be truly resilient. So I think these are well-crafted initiatives. They're not just handouts. They require some skin in the game, 10 and 20%. Of the entity to ensure that they're deploying the funds properly, and they require all sorts of plans and oversight to make sure that they're thinking about how they're going to spend these funds and optimize and stretch them. But I think thinking about, and that current grant program expires in 2026, thinking about how we might want to reauthorize or extend that or grow that, I think is a really compelling angle where you probably would see a lot of bipartisan support.
That makes a lot of sense, and I think that's something probably like water is probably something a lot of people don't think about, but it's something that's so important. And so that makes a lot of sense as to why that's a priority from your perspective. And I'm curious as well, like when you talk about cybersecurity and cyber defense, what sort of pushback do you receive, either when you're talking to politicians, legislators, whoever that is? Like, what's the most common type of pushback?
Yeah, what do you mean by pushback? I guess just to make sure
Yeah.
I'm giving you a crisp answer here.
Yeah, I'm thinking about like when you're trying to get like cybersecurity initiatives to be like a priority, when it comes to even like talking to constituents or talking to like citizens and talking to different types of stakeholders, like policymakers, decision makers, whoever that is, like what's something that like makes people what's a reason people give to say like, oh, this isn't actually a priority for me?
Yeah, fortunately, I have never heard someone say cybersecurity is not a priority. I
Yeah.
think an unfortunate byproduct of really what is the ransomware epidemic is that cybersecurity has, if it was just sort of this esoteric kind of IT thing, it's had
Hmm.
real world consequence for almost every single politician, member of Congress, state legislature, whether it's a local school or it's a hospital or it's a bank in their jurisdiction. They have seen the real world impacts of that now. So I don't think sort of I think it's unfortunate that obviously a lot of that recognition is a byproduct of activity that we wish wasn't
Right.
taking place. But as a result, we have seen pretty broad recognition that these are important things for us to tackle. I think an area that is worthy of further policy exploration is actually around metrics of policy success. I mentioned we've had grant program. There's a lot of really well-intentioned efforts, and there's federal requirements of agencies must deploy this new set of cyber technology to fortify their networks. So now they must do this new thing, and state and local governments are getting an infusion of resources to help bolster their cyber defenses. The cyber industry overall historically doesn't have great metrics to sort of measure success
Right.
of that. And so that's actually one thing that as a company that we are pushing and socializing with policymakers and other interested stakeholders is we'd like to kind of start with what we think are two baseline metrics. And I talked about these before, mean time to detect and mean time to respond. And if we can just get sort of baseline tracking of where those numbers are at across different industries, and then sort of set reasonable targets of how we'd like to see those numbers come down in a responsible way over time, then you can measure investment in other initiatives to what they're actually doing to catalyze progress against those metrics versus just sort of saying, I assume things would be worse if we weren't doing these things, but I can't sort of definitively prove that, and kind of getting out of that cycle and actually having some good metrics to point to. So I think that is an area where you are going to see a continued activity.
Yeah, that tracks and that makes a lot of sense. And so I'm curious, from the perspective of students that are interested in cybersecurity, what advice do you have for students, especially because I know that um, there's a growing cybersecurity skills shortage. And so what advice do you have for students that are interested or want to just learn more about it?
Yeah, well, this is a shameless plug for my company, but you got me here, so I'm going to do it regardless. But we actually have this really cool initiative called the Palo Alto Network Cybersecurity Academy. We have 2,500 global academy partners, and what this is essentially cyber education and curriculum in a box. So we design curriculum now that actually has 4 different modules. It started out as network security and then evolved to cloud security and has evolved to a few other things since then. But it's education that's all aligned to NIST standards. But it's adaptable because as the threat landscape has changed, and 10 years ago, cloud security wasn't that big of a deal. Now it's a huge deal. So it's aligned to federal NIST standards, but it's adaptable as we see the evolving threat landscape. And then it's for all different ages. So we have K through 12, we have middle school, high school, 2-year colleges, 4-year colleges, and so we basically created the cyber education program in a box where we have equipment and sort of virtual firewalls that people are able to train on, and it's all free. And so any school can sign up for free for this, and we basically deliver them the cyber education starter kit in a box. It's not self-promotion, in the sense that if you went to these cyber academy partners, you don't see our logo or our poster up there. This is their curriculum. We just essentially kind of give them the starter kit to help push them on their way, and then sit there behind the scenes to help the instructors iterate and help answer any questions as they begin to teach this. But it's a really effective. It's kind of a train the trainer type model. I think we're always looking for those points of scale of how can you do something that's really scalable so you're touching as many students as possible. And this has proven to be a really effective way to do that. Over 500,000 students globally have been impacted by this. And so as any student out there, whether in the middle school or a 2-year college or 4-year college, if they don't see cyber curriculum at their school, there's a way for their school to develop a cybersecurity curriculum for free. So I would encourage them to check out the Palo Alto Network Cybersecurity Academy. And again, their school can take the handoff from us and then run with it as they see fit.
That's absolutely incredible. Thank you so much for that advice. Anything else you'd like to add before we wrap things up?
Really appreciate the time here. Again, I think your first question was sort of how I got into all this and ended up going from government to industry. And I talked about the importance of the mission. Our company's slogan is, cybersecurity partner of choice, protecting our digital way of life. That second part, protecting our digital way of life, like that's the whole enchilada. I mean, that's what we're here. That's what's important in talking about. And when we think about whether it's at home or at school or our hobbies, how we engage with our friends, it's all digitally enabled now. And I can't think of sort of a more noble or just vitally important for society function than indeed protecting that digital way of life. And it's going to truly take all of us. The whole range of stakeholders is going to take engaged citizenry on that. And I think central to that is, we often talk about cyber. You just had a question about the cyber workforce and how people can get involved. A belief we have is that kind of recognizing the contours of how you protect your digital way of life and how it touches everyone now. We think every job in America is a cybersecurity job. It might be a 10% cybersecurity job, or it might be a 100% cybersecurity job, but some portion of every job in America is a cybersecurity job. You certainly cannot say that 20 years ago, but I think you can say that now and in perpetuity. I don't anticipate a point where we will stop saying that. So to me, that kind of necessitates why these are really important conversations, because even if you're a doctor out there, you go to med school, right? Not getting a degree in cybersecurity, but they're dealing with all sorts of patient data all the time, and that's
Right.
There's a huge cybersecurity element of it. So you have a hard time looking at any profession and actually not being able to tease out where that very obviously impacts our digital way of life. So these are important conversations, these are important topics, and just appreciate the opportunity to sound them out with you.
Yeah, no, appreciate that. And what you just said, I work in strategy at Adobe. The number one conversation we have with our clients is about data privacy, because I work with a lot of healthcare companies. So it's all about, is it HIPAA ready? And so completely agree with you and hear you on that. And I like what you said about pretty much every job has some sort of element of cybersecurity to it. And so with that, thank you so much for your time and talking us through your career journey. And thank you all for everyone who's listening.
Awesome. Take care. I appreciate it.